It was late afternoon, August 28, 2003, when a quiet little corner of Erie, Pennsylvania, found itself staring at something so bizarre, so unsettling it left witnesses frozen in disbelief. A pizza delivery man, Brian Wells, stood outside a bank holding a peculiar device locked around his neck, something that looked like a large metallic collar fused with a potential explosive. Only moments before, he'd calmly walked into a PNC bank and handed over a note demanding money, as if reading from a script he didn't quite believe in. And now he stood before the police, sitting on the pavement surrounded by squad cars and drawn guns, pleading that the bomb strapped to him wasn't his doing. He claimed someone forced him into this nightmare. He'd just robbed the bank of roughly $8,000, a surprisingly modest sum for such a reckless plan. It seemed too strange, too limited in scope, as if designed not for profit but for chaos. Officers yelled at him to stay still. They knew they were dealing with something out of the ordinary, but their training couldn't prepare them for this particular scene. Witnesses would later remember the tension in the air, how the police kept their distance, how Brian Wells begged for help, insisting he was just a delivery guy who'd been tricked. Only minutes later, in an unexpected flash, the device around Wells's neck began to beep ominously. In a matter of seconds, the beeping escalated to a deafening detonation. The collar bomb exploded, killing Brian Wells in front of a stunned police force and horrified onlookers. This was not a typical bank robbery gone wrong. This was something else entirely. Something deeper, darker, and more convoluted than anyone could have imagined. The scene was grisly, the shock immeasurable, and the lingering question enormous. Who had orchestrated this bizarre heist, and why? As the days turned into months and the months into years, the FBI would find itself entangled in one of the strangest criminal conspiracies in American history. Investigators discovered a web of deceit, backstabbing, and eccentric personalities, bound together by greed, paranoia, and a lust for control. Behind the scenes, a twisted mind was pulling strings, setting traps, and orchestrating an event so complicated it resembled a twisted puzzle. But in 2003, all anyone knew was that a man had just died wearing a bomb collar, and no one could say for sure how he got there or who was truly behind it. Wells's last delivery had been a fake order leading him to a remote location near a TV transmission tower. It was here investigators would later suspect that he'd been strapped with the device, handed a bizarre set of instructions, and thrust into a nightmarish scavenger hunt that ended in his death. The instructions were chilling and bizarre, telling him to follow certain landmarks, solve coded clues, and retrieve hidden keys to unlock the device. By the time he'd gotten to the bank, he seemed more confused than calm, as if following orders under threat of immediate violent punishment. But if Brian Wells was a pawn, who was the chess master? The hunt for the answer stretched far beyond the usual suspects. Over time, investigators would find themselves entangled with a handful of individuals who knew each other all too well, odd personalities who shared a tangled history of manipulation, theft, and murder. Finding the truth would take years, and when it finally emerged, it would be as disturbing as the moment that bomb went off. Midway through this search, if you find the details compelling and want to remain informed whenever we explore similar intricate stories, consider subscribing. Let's continue. The FBI investigation began with feverish intensity. A collar bomb that brutally ended a man's life in such a public manner demanded quick answers. Agents recovered handwritten instructions, carefully diagrammed plans. This was no spur-of-the-moment idea. It felt meticulously planned, like a macabre scavenger hunt designed by a mind that reveled in complexity. Over time, their inquiries led them through a maze of local connections. Erie wasn't known for grand criminal conspiracies, but beneath the surface lay a small circle of individuals with questionable ethics and troubled pasts. One name that came up repeatedly was Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong. She was known around town as intelligent but also volatile, with a history of mental health issues and violence. Another figure, William Rothstein, a handyman known for his peculiarities, also found himself on the FBI's radar. Then there was Kenneth Barnes, a man whispered about as being connected to the underbelly of the community. Investigators noticed that the instructions Brian Wells carried appeared to be created by someone with a knack for detail. Whoever wrote them wanted the victim to travel from one point to another, as if testing obedience. The device itself was cunningly made, a layered contraption that suggested at least a basic engineering background. It had multiple tripwires, locks, and decoys, and whoever built it had done so meticulously. This was not an improvised explosive device thrown together in a hurry. This was methodical. In the midst of the long, painstaking investigation, public curiosity spiked. People wanted to know how such a madness could unfold in a quiet town. Over time, the case took on a life of its own, as if everyone had a theory. But the FBI played it close to the vest, determined to find concrete evidence. They followed the money-traced phone calls and examined every scrap of paper. Some leads were dead ends, others pointed to peculiar alliances. It was during this slow burn of investigative work that public interest waned, but the Bureau kept at it. Years passed before the FBI announced it had pieced together the core players. Layer by layer, the truth emerged. The murder of a man named James Roden, for instance, hinted that someone within the group was capable of lethal violence even beyond the Collar Bomb incident. As they dug deeper, investigators concluded the plot was far more twisted than a simple bank robbery. This was a scheme hatched not by one lone genius, but by a small gang of conspirators fueled by greed and madness. Central to this conspiracy was Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong, a woman once considered highly intelligent, but whose life was marred by alleged mental instability and a string of suspicious incidents. She had a history of violent relationships and financial trouble. The FBI began to see her as a prime mover behind the scenes. Backing up this suspicion was the involvement of William Rothstein, a man who knew Marjorie for decades. Before he died, Rothstein himself left behind cryptic hints, and his property had been a key location tied to these events. He had harbored secrets so deep that even after his death, they continued to unravel. Kenneth Barnes emerged as another crucial figure, an informal handyman, a fishing buddy of some in the group, and a man who allegedly boasted about his role in the crime. He would later become an informant, trading details for a reduced sentence, pulling the FBI closer to the spine of the operation. Slowly, the narrative solidified. Diehl-Armstrong needed money, Barnes and Rothstein had the know-how, and together they concocted a plan so devilishly convoluted that they believed it would shield them from detection. But the conspiracy wasn't just about the bank robbery. At one point, Marjorie's boyfriend, James Roden, turned up murdered. Prosecutors alleged that Marjorie killed him because he threatened to reveal details of their collar bomb plot. This added another disturbing layer to the case. These people weren't afraid to eliminate loose ends. The complexity intensified. The FBI discovered that Brian Wells might have initially known about the plan, or at least parts of it, but it wasn't clear if he was a willing participant or a hapless victim. The collar bomb had multiple locking mechanisms, and key pieces of evidence suggested that Wells might not have expected to end up dead. Perhaps he believed he could walk away if he followed orders. The criminals had tried to create a story that was almost cartoonish in its complexity, involving hidden clues, multiple drop points, and a bizarre puzzle-like set of directives. But in reality, it was sloppier than they thought. Their personal connections, past crimes, and frantic attempts to cover their tracks made them vulnerable. The FBI steadily built a case that painted Diehl-Armstrong as the mastermind who orchestrated the entire scheme to get money for another murder-for-hire plot. When the FBI finally brought charges, Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong stood at the center. Kenneth Barnes admitted his role, claiming Marjorie planned everything. Rothstein, who died of cancer in 2004, could not face trial, but investigators believed he played a key part in constructing the device. As the indictments rolled out, the public was stunned. This was not some foreign terrorist plot. It was a homegrown conspiracy involving a handful of troubled individuals who lacked any grand ideology. Their plan was simply to secure money, silence threats, and manipulate each other in the process. In court, the details emerged like a twisted thriller. Prosecutors argued that Diehl-Armstrong wanted money to pay Barnes to kill her father so she would receive his inheritance. To get that money, they cooked up this complex bank robbery. She denied it all, insisting she was framed, that the others were lying. But the evidence was too great. The puzzle pieces, handwritten notes, strange payoffs, the murder of Roden, all fit together in a grim mosaic of greed and cruelty. The trials dragged on for years, peppered with appeals, mental competency hearings, and countless attempts to shift blame. But eventually, the criminal justice system did what it was designed to do. It brought clarity. In 2010, Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong was convicted for her role in the Collar Bomb Heist and given a life sentence. Kenneth Barnes pleaded guilty and cooperated, receiving a lesser sentence. Brian Wells was officially considered a victim of the plot, though some lingering questions remained. Investigators had found some hints that Wells might have agreed to be part of a fake robbery without realizing he would actually wear a live bomb. Whether he was a knowing accomplice at some early stage or entirely an innocent victim coerced at gunpoint might never be fully resolved. But one fact stood above all else. He lost his life in a manner so shocking that years later, people still struggle to comprehend it. In the following years, Diehl-Armstrong languished in prison, fighting her conviction but never escaping its weight. She passed away behind bars in 2017, leaving behind a legacy of infamous cunning. The Collar Bomb case became a haunting landmark in criminal history, a reminder that truth can be stranger than any fiction. It was featured in documentaries, discussed by armchair detectives and dissected by lawyers and law enforcement professionals. The sheer audacity of the plot, the brutality of the crime, and the bizarre collection of characters involved solidified its place in America's criminal lore. The story is a testament to how deep human darkness can run, even in quiet towns where no one expects anything extraordinary. It shows that sometimes the most chilling conspiracies don't burst forth from elaborate criminal syndicates, but from small groups of people whose psychological instability and hunger for power lead them down a twisted path. If you found this narrative gripping, a small gesture of support like a quick thumbs up goes a long way. And that's how the Collar Bomb Heist, born out of a twisted conspiracy, evolved over years, ensnaring victims, conspirators, and an entire community in its dark shadow. It began with a pizza delivery call and ended with life sentences, shattered lives, and a cautionary tale etched forever into American true crime history.